Welcome to the MBA Secrets podcast today. We're really lucky and excited to have Jesse Wilkinson with us, who is an MBA candidate at the University of Virginia at the Darden School of Business. A real quick, brief background on Jesse is his bachelor's degree is actually in linguistics, which I'm very interested to hear more about. That's a very interesting and unique background for somebody who's getting an MBA. Professionally, he has dabbled in finance and consulting with companies like Fidelity and Bain, which, amazing companies. And now, like I said, he's at the University of Virginia. So Jesse, with that, thank you so much for being here. And we'd love to hear more about that background.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Yeah, so I guess about my professional background. As you mentioned, studied linguistics. So I went to BYU,
Right.
Brigham Young University, undergrad. And I decided to study linguistics. I guess there's a few reasons for that. I guess it'd be helpful to know that I'm the first person in my family to go to college.
Wow.
And so
good for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, I had a really influential high school teacher who taught, literature. And she said, "Oh, hey, look, you really love languages. I like reading the dictionary, weird stuff like that." She said, "You should study linguistics." So I said,
Wow.
"Okay." And I just declared my major right out of high school. So, I went to school, and as I was, getting toward the end, I realized that I didn't necessarily want to work in linguistics. I mean, I loved the degree, learned a ton of interesting stuff. But the way I saw it, there were only a few paths. You could go to academia, or document languages, or or teach, right? Or if you had a programming background, you could go work in kind of natural language processing, work for a tech company. And I had no programming background, and so that didn't really make sense either. And so I said, "Oh, I got to figure out something else to do." And so I was really fortunate to have sort of a mentor, a friend's dad, basically, who had worked at Fidelity for 25, 30 years. And so I called him up and said, "Hey, what's this all about?" To me at that time, finance and business were basically just like two big categories, but finance all meant the same thing to me.
Right.
I didn't know the difference between, barely like a bank teller and commercial loans and private equity, right? It was all just finance.
It's all the same thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And awesome. So learned a little bit about, I guess you'd call it more like financial advising type stuff. And so, with some help from him, and I've recently been married, so my in-laws helped me.
Congrats.
My interviews. Thank you. I guess it's been a few years now, but it was new at the time, and so they helped me prepare, and so I got a job at Fidelity.
Awesome.
And it was great. I really liked it. It was really like drinking from a fire hose. I had taken one business class in all of undergrad.
Wow.
I took like a marketing class, and that was it, right? And so I vaguely knew what the word income statement meant. I'd heard of it once or twice, but so learned a bunch about financial markets. And then I worked for 2 years working with high net worth individuals, which was awesome. They kind of were like mentors to me as well, in a sense. Yeah. I remember that one client I worked with was an executive for, I think, like Outback Steakhouse or something.
Wow, cool.
And so, when I would talk to these folks, I would, maybe I shouldn't have been doing this, right? But I would like dig in and say, "Hey, tell me about what you did, what made you successful," and sort of got broad exposure to business, financial services, sort of the general economic landscape. And so, that was fantastic. But what I found is that the job I wanted more rigor. I was really loving learning all that I was, but I wanted more of a challenge, maybe more analytical work. Um, and so then I took a job with a small, not very well known firm called the Depository Trust Company.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I worked there for 2 years, and basically, it won't get into everything that they do, but um, effectively, they provide the kind of infrastructure between what happens when you make a stock trade and 2 days later when the stock, the shares and the cash actually exchange hands. They provide all of that infrastructure. Originally, it was a big room on the back of the New York Stock Exchange. Now it's all digital, of course.
Right.
But I worked for that firm, and I worked in market risk for 2 years. So it was client facing, but my clients were like financial institutions instead of individuals. So anyway, I was there for 2 years. Felt like I learned a ton, and then from there is when I decided to go to business school. And happy to dive into like how that transition took place, but that sort of brings me up a little bit closer
Right.
to now.
Well, I do want to get into that, but I am stuck on the fact that you're the first person in your family to go to college, because I think that's the coolest thing ever. And you did it. You got a degree from a great university, and I want to hear a little bit more about why. This might sound weird, but why that wasn't enough for you, right? You're now into this second tier of a master's degree, which is incredible on its own, but you didn't necessarily have that familial experience or I don't know what the word is, but you know what I'm saying. Just this,
Yeah.
you're taking it to this next step, which is incredible. I just want to hear your thoughts on that, because I think it's just amazing.
Yeah. I guess I have a few thoughts. I think one thing is that my parents, didn't have the opportunity to, to go to a 4-year university, but they always recognized like how important education was. And so, I remember my mom would read to me all the time when I was little, and so it developed into this love of reading. If I was going to point to like one of a few things that I think is most responsible for maybe what if you'd call it my trajectory, I don't know. It's a little weird calling it that, but sure. I think that would be one of them. So I just grew up devouring books. Wow. I was the type of kid that my mom would call me to dinner and I wouldn't.
You were reading.
Yeah, exactly. I was late because I was reading, turning pages, and she had to call me 2 or 3 times. So
wow.
I think reading was one of them. My parents, they also always told me, you got to go to college. I don't think they knew or I knew what to do once I got there, right. But they said like, but you knew,
important. Yeah,
exactly. Knew it was important for me to go. And then the other thing I would say responsible, I think, is that I was fortunate that I had access to mentors that I think a lot of other people maybe don't. And that is probably the big difference. I think there are a lot of, smart, ambitious kids who believe in education that just don't know exactly what to do. But when I was in high school, I played basketball, and so my parents they sacrificed a bit to to send me to high school and moved into a house that maybe it was a little bit bigger than they would have wanted to, and a little bit more expensive than they maybe could afford, so that I could not just me, I had siblings as well, but largely so that I could go play basketball at this high school, and as a result, it was in this area where a lot of people have sort of more education, work in business, and so I found myself surrounded by people who had successful careers that because they were parents of friends or just neighbors or whatever, I got to rub shoulders with them. And so I think that was the other big thing, that I sort of inherited this group of mentors that made these things possible. And this job at Fidelity is a prime example of that. It was a guy that lived down the street became good friends, and then his dad became, as it sort of happens, kind of a second set of parents to me. And so that's sort of how that happened.
That's amazing. Well, it's clear that you were raised by incredible parents. So the very interesting story. So yeah, let's go into that. Why you did choose to do this now. You're in your MBA. You had one business class in all of your undergrad, and now you've learned all these amazing things, which just goes to show for so many people, including myself, and I love this, that you learn so much on the job. You can't learn everything in the classroom, right? So yeah, take us through that. Why you chose to now start your MBA? Well, I guess you're kind of towards the end of it. Is that right?
Yeah. I graduated in May. Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, why did you decide to get your MBA?
Yeah. So there's, I guess there's a few reasons, and it's funny because these things always, like in hindsight, they seem so linear, right? And as you're going through them, I think they rarely seem that way. So I guess there were like a few things that happened. One is that my father-in-law, once I got married, my father-in-law is an MBA.
Gotcha.
And so as I saw and talked with him and saw sort of what his career looked like, I realized, or I sort of started getting familiar with what that meant, really. That's one. The second thing is, and this is probably the main driving force behind why I decided to get an MBA. I actually decided that I wanted to make a career shift, and I thought I wanted to get into management consulting. And so I had one single friend that I knew who was working in the industry. He actually worked at Bain. And so I had a call with him, a few months after I started my second job at the depository trust company. I had a call with him and said, hey, look, tell me about your job and how do I do it? And he, it was funny. He's actually in business school now at Harvard Business School.
Wow.
But he said something like, it is very, very, and he used the word very like 5 or 6 times to say it's very unlikely that you'll get hired unless you go to business school. Basically, gotcha. If you don't go out of undergrad, it is possible, but the chances are very, very small.
Right.
And so you need to get an MBA if that's what you want to do. And so that's what sort of really pushed me headlong into researching, and it was a really long process, honestly. I spent a year and a half, maybe close to 2 years, thinking about prepping for deciding if I wanted to go to business school. So those were 2 of the factors I think that really pushed me to say, like, you know what, like I think I should do this.
It's amazing. I just love this. Every answer you've given, there's been people who are very impactful, right? You've had these mentors, whether it's parents or friends or, kind of like a second set of parents. And that's well, this podcast is something that I hope can be a small version of that, where people like you, Jesse, can be a mentor to anybody who's listening. And I think that's very much coming through here. Okay,
do you mind if
please,
I add something?
Yeah,
because it's interesting that you say that. I've had this idea swirling around for a while, and I haven't really known how to express it. But I think at the same time, there's been sort of two lines of learning that have been going on in my life at the same time since graduating from undergrad. And one has been sort of this traditional learning on the job, learning from mentors, and building up my network.
Right.
But the other that I think has been really important and incredibly valuable has just been this phenomenal availability of information online. And
Right.
so, you know, I discovered podcasts sometime uh, around then when I finished school, and I've actually learned a ton from podcasts. From I'm on Twitter, or
Right.
trying to scale back lately, but I used to spend
We
a lot
all
of
are.
time on Twitter,
Right.
and so just reading articles, and a ton of Google searches
Mm-hmm.
uh, to sort of supplement things that I was hearing from mentors or in real life. And so, I told you about the conversation with my father-in-law
Mm-hmm.
and this conversation with this friend, but in between then, I'm sure I spent several hours Googling, listening to podcasts about consulting, maybe some podcasts about business school as well,
Right.
that sort of filled in the gaps. And so I do think I do think it's an underrated,
Right.
or maybe it's not underrated. Maybe I just haven't talked to a lot of folks about it, but
Sure.
a great way to learn and to figure out things about the world and about yourself is to listen to all this content that's out there, and maybe a lot of it's not useful, but some of it definitely is. So anyway, I think it's cool that you're doing this.
Well, I
Hopefully
appreciate
this
it.
stuff can influence people the same way it influenced me.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. So you said you have been married for a few years. I am as well, and I have a 7-month-old baby, and it's, business school is a huge time commitment, let alone financial, all of those things we know. But how has it been from a family standpoint? How has your family dealt with maybe the time that it takes you away and all of that?
Yeah. My family is awesome. Everybody says that, right?
Yeah.
My partner has been extremely supportive. I think since whenever I decided to be serious about business school, we sat down and I sort of said to her like, "Hey, look, I think this is what this will take. This is what it would mean for possibly for my career trajectory. This is what it might mean for kind of a home life." And um, she's been extremely supportive the whole time. And so I think it was definitely tough. The first year of business school, I was almost never home.
Wow.
I think, and maybe we'll get into it. One of the things that's interesting about Darden, the Darden School, is that they pride themselves on this like rigorous curriculum, and so I think if you really throw yourself into it, plus recruiting and clubs and all those things, it really eats up a lot of your time. And so we just sort of try to manage it as it goes. But she's supportive, and then when I'm home, so my daughter's almost 4.
Mm.
Um, Actually, I have one on the way as
Oh,
well.
awesome.
Um,
Congrats.
yeah, thank you. Congrats
So
to you as
fun.
well, man.
Yeah,
seven
thank you.
months is
Yeah.
is is
We're
a great
finally
time.
starting to sleep through the night now, so it's great.
So
Yeah.
you got to be a whole new person these
Yep,
days.
exactly.
But basically, what I'm getting at is, yeah, it's definitely demanding. And so a couple of the good things, business schools, as far as I can tell, basically everywhere, give you Fridays off of school. And so, we really try to spend a lot of time together on the weekend. And then for us, we really just made, like, my family has really become part of the Darden family. Like,
Cool.
everybody that almost all of my professors and my classmates know my daughter's name, and
Hmm.
they say hi to her, when they see her. Sometimes she would bring her scooter and kind of go down the hallways. And then my partner has good friends that are in my class, and so just sort of made them part of the family, so that occasionally they would buzz up to the school and spend some time with me while I was studying, or what have you. So I think, and she'd of course, be able to answer the question better, but I think that's how we've made it work, is try to really spend weekends together,
Yeah.
and then during the week, have them come by and be part of the family wherever they could.
Wow, great. That is awesome. It almost feels like if you make it through business school and you haven't built relationships with your classmates to the point where they they at least know your partner's name or your children's names, like you've missed a huge opportunity. So it sounds like you've definitely made that, that was a necessity, and it sounds like it's really paying off, and you're going to know these people throughout the rest of your career, throughout the rest of your life. And that's so important to have personal relationships. And I think that's something that keeps continuing to come up in all of these conversations. Um, but so aside from awesome people, sounds like Darden has great people, a really good curriculum that like forces you to learn all of that. What else drew you there? Were there multiple schools that you were looking at, or why did you have the final decision to go to UVA?
Yeah. Um, so it's funny, when I first started looking at business schools, I did what I imagine 80% of people do, which is I pulled up the rankings list.
Of course, yes.
And just started looking at, here's what the rankings look like. I found some data on the aggregated, like the Gmat, middle 80 percentile, the average GPA. So I started there, and being a pretty analytical person, I built this big, call it a spreadsheet,
Sure.
with all my criteria, and I was going to build
Wow.
this model that just spit out where I should go to school. None of that stuff worked. None of that worked.
It's a good idea though. I like that.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And it just, what I found is that what spat out, it just didn't feel exactly right. And so,
do you remember, sorry to interject, do you remember what it spat out for you?
I don't remember exactly. I remember that like University of Wisconsin was like pretty high on the list, and I think that's because I think maybe the tuition was like priced a little bit better or something. But then I looked at it and I was like, I'm not trying to go to Wisconsin. It's too cold.
It's a little chilly. Yeah.
I grew up in Utah yep. County, and once I moved to Dallas, I was like, that's it. I
can't go back.
I can't go back. Although Texas
UVA,
is under a foot of snow right now, right?
4 million people. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So, what I did do, there were a few things I did, and actually, one of the things that I don't think it helped me choose a school. By the way, I'll get there.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't think it helped me choose a school, but I actually did a survey, and I surveyed like 50 people, and I tried to get them from all different aspects of my life. So people that I knew, like growing up, that just that I grew up around, church leaders or things like that, friends from high school, friends from college, coworkers from different jobs, community and organizations, sports teams that I played with. I try to get people from like a huge cross section, different cross sections of my life. And I asked them, like, what do you think? It was definitely self-centered, but like, tell me what you think are my strengths. Tell me the first thing you think about me is, which of these mission statements, I listed some mission statements of various schools, which one do you think aligns best with me? And what I sort of realized is that it was all noise. It came out with basically that these were all generally the same. Maybe there were a couple schools. I think Yale scored really well their mission statement. But basically, the reason I tell you both of these stories is because I think that in the end, I felt like all these analytical methods were, one, they were too complex, but two, they just weren't, I think they didn't capture like what I think is actually important about where you go to school. And so now to answer your question, why did I choose UVA? And I think there were like a few real reasons that were really attractive to me. For one is that I decided that I wanted to work in management consulting. And so I wanted to go to a school where these consulting firms that I was targeting, had a consistent presence and recruited, year in and year out.
Right.
And so there are basically, 17 or 20 schools that the firms go to nationally, and then there are regional schools as well, where if you're in, I don't know, call it Denver, maybe it's University of Colorado or something.
Right.
I just made that up, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so that was one. I was like, I'm going for a career pivot, and so I should definitely prioritize that. That was one thing. I really loved the Darden's really dedicated to the case method, the Socratic method of teaching.
Yeah.
I think Darden and I think Harvard Business School is the other one that's pretty committed to that.
Right.
And so I went to the school and had a sample case, that I sat through, and honestly, it was electrifying. Like the energy in the room was amazing, and I just thought, wow, this would be an incredible like academic experience to have this type of environment where everyone's engaged. You're kind of forced to be engaged, and so the case method was really exciting to me. But the real reason, the number one reason, is there was just a feeling that I had.
The feeling. Yep.
Yeah, I remember I had visited a few other schools, had met lots of others at different career fair, MBA fairs, and things like that. And when I touched down in Charlottesville, which I wouldn't have thought, in the Uber to my hotel, I was already texting my wife saying like, "Hey, I don't know what, but this just feels right."
Wow.
And then I showed up to the school, and they do this kind of ritual on Thursdays where they, Thursday after class, people get together, there's food out, music and drinks, and people kind of unwind from the week. And so I walked into one of those, and one of the students was just immediately super welcoming and warm. She was like, "Hey, it's so nice to meet you. What's your name? What are you doing here?" She introduced me to 3 or 4 other people right away and said, like, grab some food, sit down, excited to talk to you. So I had just this really warm reception when I got to the school, and I found that carried over in most of my interactions. And so honestly, I just felt like, wow, these come back to the people. These are the type of people that I would want to spend 2 years with. And all of it sort of just added up to be this feeling I had that like, wow, this is just where I want to be. And the other factors are important too, right? Like It's also nice that Charlottesville is a college town. It was great for my daughter. I thought it would be better than like maybe New York City,
right?
For me personally. Others like would love that, but that's kind of what it really boils down to, was like that feeling where I just couldn't shake it. Like that's where I just felt like, man, I really want to end up here.
Well, I can relate to that. If anybody listening has heard the first episode of this podcast, I share a similar experience with where I'm going to school. It's worth taking the time to really just sit down, and maybe the spreadsheets or the models that you build aren't necessarily right. It's what you feel is best. So it's amazing insight. Thank you. Okay, so I know we might be running low on time. I just love this conversation. It's so good.
Yeah, I've got time if you do. I don't know where you're at.
Good. No, that's great. That sounds awesome. So let's talk about the application, because obviously UVA is it's a great school, right? That comes up on the rankings there that we all look at. And so that means, good work history, the Gmat, all of these things. What was the application process like for you? And maybe some details about specifically the Gmat. I know a lot of people like to hear about that.
Yeah. So like what was it like taking the Gmat basically?
Yeah. How did you approach it? What was your experience with it? All just anywhere you want to take, that's great.
Yeah. So the application process was really interesting. And the Gmat was some of the worst few months, emotional up and downs of my life.
Amen.
I think Another theme about my life is that I'm super, I want to research everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of time on going deep in blogs and forums that, there are calculators that guess based on your GPA and this, that, the other, what your chances are of getting into various schools. I don't know that I recommend that to people. Might be good to do one, look at one or two things as like a sanity check. But I think what I started doing was trying to figure out how to like fit into the box, right? Like how do I be exactly what these schools want? And so in terms of like logistically how the application process went, I applied to 3 schools in round 1, and my plan was, okay, I'll apply to these 3 schools. They were the schools that I felt like I was most excited about, which was UVA, Yale, and Dartmouth. Tuck.
Mm-hmm.
And then my goal was to apply to like 8 or 10 schools in round 2 and have a bit high. In terms of ranking, Yale, Dartmouth, and UVA are usually ranked pretty closely.
Right.
And so my goal was round 2. If I didn't get into the school that I was excited about, I was going to go a little bit higher on the list and a little bit lower on the list and sort of give myself a more broad range. Luckily, it worked out with UVA, which is where I was most excited about.
Yeah.
So the application process for me was just, I guess phase 1 was just really figuring out like what schools I was going to apply to. And then from there, I jumped into the Gmat. In the Gmat, it's hard. I wish I had a better process for the Gmat, but basically the way I did is I started by just taking a practice test. I took it. I don't even remember what I scored, but I remember it was not close to good enough to where I wanted it to be. And so I spent the next 6 months or so studying, and I would take practice tests maybe every month or so. I would study probably 6 to 10 hours a week, and then I actually showed up. I was scoring a little, like right around where I wanted to be, when I went to the to take the actual test for the first time. And a little tidbit that's I guess useful is when I would study with white noise, because at the time I had a baby,
right.
And so I would have white noise in my ear, and when I got to the testing center, somebody just said as I was walking in, "Hey, would you like to use these noise canceling headphones?"
Oh yeah.
I said, "Okay, yeah, sure." And so I didn't think about, I thought, okay, well, I just want to block out the noise. So I put them on, and it was probably the nerves plus the different ambient, if you will. But I finished the math section like 20 minutes early.
Oh my
and
goodness.
absolutely bombed. Absolutely bombed the test. I walked out
20 minutes early. Wow.
I finished super early. I think I was just off my game.
That's amazing.
Nothing was like really making sense.
Yeah.
So I think I guessed a few, and by then I don't know if the test knew like, oh, this guy's not for real. So they gave me the easy questions, and so I walked away and like just like trashed my scores right then, like deleted my scores. And so I was defeated. I called my mom, called my wife, said like, I don't know if it's going to work out. And then my wife was like, well, look, I was telling her what happened. She's like, well, what were you thinking with the headphones, right? And so we decided like, you know what, I should study some more. And so I actually spent the money and hired a tutor. Went to like a Gmat class is probably the more appropriate way to describe it. And so that was pretty useful, I think. Actually did more improvement, I think, in the verbal section than I did on the math.
Interesting.
And I think that's what really like boosted my score in the end, is I scored pretty well in the verbal section. But went back, I think probably 2.5, 3 months later, and took it again, and actually scored a little bit above my where I was testing. And I thought, I think the score is good enough to get into the school that I was hoping for. So that, once I finished the GMAT, I was like, okay, great.
Well, put it
Finally,
away. Yeah.
exactly. I felt like I had done kind of 80%. And so from then it was really just filling out the applications and then writing the essays, which I spent a bit of time on, and then I submitted the applications.
That's great. Oh, the GMAT. Oh my goodness. It's good to hear other people's stories, because now I feel like I'm not alone, right? And I hope everybody else feels that same way. Okay, the really the last thing here. You clearly have kind of embraced the community there at UVA, and you obviously have good connections and relationships there. Tell us how you've done it. What advice would you give to people to make sure that they're having that same experience and maximizing every single day in their program?
Yeah. See, the assumption there is that I've figured it out, right?
All right. You seem to have. From the outside, it looks very you've definitely it's something to model from where I sit. So, with that, I just would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, so how to maximize it? I think there's a maxim that I heard. Maybe they say it everywhere, but that at business school, or they'd say at Darden, you can do two things. You can do two of three things well. People come for three reasons: they come to get a job, they come to gain a network, or socialize, or party, or pick your poison there. And they come to get a business education. And you can do two of those three things well. That's what people would say. And I sort of reject that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think for me, that what I've tried to do is just do each of those things with different levels of intensity at different points during school. So for me, at the beginning, I really focused on getting a job, spent a lot of time networking, preparing for interviews. So I was really focused on getting the job that I wanted. And I also spent a lot of energy, I think, getting the baseline of business education, right? At Darden, they have the core curriculum, which is 3/4 of classes that everyone's required to take. And so I thought during that portion, I really wanted to focus in. But the great thing is that after basically winter break, interviews finished up shortly thereafter, and so the getting a job part was sort of done. Now, of course, you got to go to the internship and perform well, but that part is sort of done. And so now there's only those two of those things left to do.
Yeah, great
and so I think I've then fluctuated more towards socializing. So I would say focus on each of those three things, and maybe there's more than three, but on each of those three things at different points, just like when it makes sense. And the second one, I think, to emphasize further that point, what I've recently felt is that I've been trying to spend more time getting to know alumni and broadening my network. I think business school is really, the pandemic has made it more clear that business school is a unique time where you're surrounded, either literally or at least virtually, by a couple hundred people who are generally like-minded. They have similar goals, similar backgrounds, and are thinking about the types of things that you are, right? And so I think to myself, like, wow, what a valuable asset to have in a career, in your career, right? Is like you mentioned, these people that if you call in 5 years will pick up the
Mhm.
phone like it was yesterday.
Right.
And so I think I've been focusing on that, but also have been realizing like, wow, there are a ton of alumni who are doing almost without exception amazing things in their career. And so I've been trying to spend time getting to know some of those folks before I
Hmm.
leave. And not that it will be too late, but
Yeah.
I'd really say that there's probably a lot of focus on like what's going on campus, and maybe there's an opportunity to get to know people on the outside, and even beyond just your own school, right? The more broad
Right.
sort of MBA community where people I think are really excited and interested to get to know other MBAs who've done similar things. So I'd say those things are all things I guess I would say to maximize the experience. But I mean, I think more than anything, I just wake up every day and try to figure out what the best use of my time is. So it might sound nice, like all wrapped up in a bow like that, but I think I'm just trying
Taking it
to
day by day.
figure. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Just trying to figure
Yeah.
it out day by day.
Well, that in and of itself is great advice, I think. This is great, Jesse. Well, I know you've got plenty to do, plenty to work on. You've got your family to look after, and so I don't want to keep you too much longer. I just wanted to quick takeaway from me. Well, certainly there's not any one thing that I could possibly pick out from all of that. Um, but everything that you talked about, from mentors to going with that feeling when you're looking for programs, and just the day-to-day experience is just awesome stuff. I really appreciate your insights. And um, if you have any kind of a last thought or anything that you'd want to share with anybody listening, more than welcome to.
Yeah,
We'd love to hear it.
yeah. So I guess what I would say is that I've found that people are almost always willing to have a conversation.
Hmm.
And if they're not, then that's totally okay,
Hmm.
but you're no worse off. So I think, um, I think that like if you want to know about something that someone's doing, or learn about their path, you know, reach out to them.
Hmm.
And that's not to say that everybody's going to respond and
Right.
jump on the phone with you, right? But I do think that that instinct can be super useful. I personally think and I think it says this on my LinkedIn, so a little embarrassing, but I think there's no better way to learn something than through a conversation. Maybe more efficient ways to learn things. I'm not saying it's the most efficient, but there's no better way
Yeah.
to learn like things in like rich detail or with nuance than having a conversation. So, talk to more people, I guess, would be my one bit of advice.
Amazing. That's perfect. Well, again, Jesse, thank you so much for being here. I loved it. Thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing these thoughts, and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me on.